In the silent, unending theater of the cosmos, humanity has for millennia cast its gaze upward, seeking meaning in the celestial ballet of the stars. We mapped their movements, named their formations, and built our earliest civilizations by their light. In Egypt, the Great Pyramids of Giza mirrored the 3 stars of Orion's belt with an accuracy that defies coincidence. In the jungles of Mesoamerica, the Maya tracked the cycle of the Pleiades, creating a calendar of such complexity that it rivals our own. Across the globe, from the windswept plains of Salisbury to the sun-scorched mesas of the American Southwest, ancient cultures demonstrated a profound and seemingly impossible understanding of the heavens. The accepted narrative, the one taught in schools and repeated in documentaries, tells us this was the dawn of human ingenuity, the slow, methodical climb from superstition to science, born of a need to track seasons for agriculture and navigate the vast, uncharted oceans. This story, however, has always felt incomplete, a placid surface concealing unfathomable depths. It attributes a series of global synchronized intellectual explosions to mere chance and necessity. The truth, as is so often the case, was not simply forgotten, but deliberately buried beneath layers of academic dogma and the comforting illusion of our own self-contained brilliance. For thousands of years, the real story of our connection to the stars remained a silent testament, a message waiting for a recipient. But in the year 2023, nearly 75 years after the modern UFO era began, a routine deep space imaging survey by a geostationary satellite detected something that could not be explained. A faint, persistent, and impossibly structured energy signature emanating not from the void of space, but from a desolate, unmapped stretch of the Atacama Desert in Chile, one of the driest and most lifeless places on Earth. The discovery, a single anomaly in a sea of data, would act as a key, unlocking a door to humanity's past that we never even knew existed, and reopening an investigation into the most fundamental question of all: are we alone? And if we are not, have our celestial companions been speaking to us all along, their divine messages hidden in plain sight, written in the language of the stars? The burden of answering this question would fall to one man, a researcher who had spent his entire career on the fringes of accepted science, a man who had long suspected that the star maps of our ancestors were more than just calendars. Dr. Aris Thorne, an archaeoastronomer whose colleagues called him a dreamer, was about to find that his dreams were more real and more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. The satellite ping was the first whisper of a truth that would shatter our understanding of history, divinity, and humanity's place in the universe. Aris, hunched over his cluttered desk in a small, underfunded university office, felt the familiar weight of academic isolation. His life's work was a tapestry woven from threads others discarded. The celestial alignment of megalithic structures, the recurring motif of 7 stars across dozens of unconnected cultures, the uncanny astronomical knowledge of so-called primitive peoples. He saw a pattern, a global blueprint that screamed of a single intelligent source. But his peers saw only pareidolia, the human tendency to find patterns in random noise. He had just published a paper, The Orion Correlation, a case for a pre-Diluvian global navigational system, which had been met with a resounding silence from the mainstream, punctuated only by a few scathing online reviews from tenured historians who dismissed his work as pseudo-archaeological fantasy. He traced the outline of the Giza Plateau on a well-worn map, the 3 Great Pyramids an anchor point in his sprawling theory. They didn't just align with Orion's belt, they were a terrestrial effigy of it, a message in stone. But who was the message for? And who was the sender? He felt a familiar surge of frustration and conviction. He knew, with an instinct that transcended evidence, that he was on the brink of something monumental. The world was a scattered jigsaw puzzle, and he was convinced he was the only one who saw that the pieces, though continents apart, were all from the same box. He stared out his window at the darkening sky, the first stars beginning to emerge from the twilight haze. They were not just points of light. They were destinations. They were origins. They were witnesses. The ringing of his phone, a shrill and unwelcome sound, tore him from his reverie. He didn't recognize the number. He almost let it go to voicemail, But some impulse, the same one that drove his research, made him answer. The voice on the other end was professional, clipped, and tinged with an accent he placed as Eastern European. It was a voice that dealt in data, not dreams. And it was about to give him the one thing he had always lacked, proof. The call came from Dr. Lena Petrova, a senior analyst at a private satellite imaging consortium based in Geneva. She spoke with a cautious precision, her words carefully chosen, as if she were navigating a minefield. She explained that she was part of a team conducting a multi-spectrum survey of the Andes mountain range, primarily for geological and mineralogical purposes. During a sweep over the Atacama, a region they typically used for sensor calibration due to its atmospheric clarity and lack of interference, an automated alert had flagged a persistent anomaly. It was a low-frequency electromagnetic field, pulsing in a complex but repeating sequence. It was weak, almost imperceptible against the background noise of the planet, but it was undeniably artificial. The signal's origin point was a small, arid plateau deep within a restricted national park, an area that, according to all available topographical and archaeological surveys, was empty, utterly barren. Lena admitted, with a hint of professional embarrassment, that her team had spent 3 weeks trying to debunk the signal. They had blamed it on equipment malfunction, solar flares, undocumented military activity, even a bizarre natural geologic phenomenon. Every hypothesis had failed. The signal was real, it was structured, and it was coming from a place where nothing should be. She had come across Aris Thorne's name during a deep dive into fringe scientific literature. His papers on terrestrial energy grids and the potential for ancient sites to function as electromagnetic resonators were, in her words, highly unorthodox. But he was the only academic on the planet whose work, however speculative, provided a theoretical framework for what her satellite was seeing. She was calling not with an endorsement, but with a problem she could not solve. She sent him the data packet as they spoke, telemetry, spectral analysis, positional coordinates, and the waveform of the signal itself. Aris opened the files on his second monitor, his heart beginning to pound in his chest. The screen filled with charts and graphs, but it was the waveform that seized his attention. It wasn't random static. It was a cascade of pulses and pauses, a rhythmic beat that felt ancient and profound. It looked less like a radio signal and more like a heartbeat. A slow, deliberate, intelligent heartbeat. Dr. Thorne, Lena's voice crackled through the phone. What you proposed in your Orion paper. You spoke of certain ancient sites acting as nodes in a global network. You theorized they could be passive markers, or perhaps even active resonators. This signal, it behaves like a resonator's output. It's not a broadcast in the conventional sense. It's more like a harmonic echo. Aris stared, his mind racing, connecting a dozen different threads at once. The Atacama, one of the best places on Earth for astronomical observation. The Incas and their predecessors, who worshipped sky gods. The Nazca Lines, not far to the north, giant geoglyphs visible only from the air. Was this the power source? The central hub? He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, the feeling of a lifetime of theory suddenly solidifying into hard, measurable fact. The pattern, Aris whispered, his voice hoarse. The sequence of the pulses, is it a prime number sequence? There was a pause on the other end of the line. He could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. My God, Lena said, her professional composure finally cracking. The primary interval between the major pulse clusters. It follows the first 12 prime numbers. It repeats every hour. We saw the pattern, but we classified it as a data artifact. It seemed too perfect. It was a classic calling card. The universal language of mathematics. A signal designed to be recognized as artificial by any intelligent civilization capable of detecting it. It was a beacon. I have to go there, Aris said, the decision forming with absolute certainty. There was no other option. This was the anomaly he had been searching for his entire life, the out-of-place clue that could unravel everything. Dr. Thorne, the area is protected and extremely remote, Lena cautioned. There are no roads. It's a multi-day trek through some of the most inhospitable terrain on the planet. But Aris was no longer listening to the warnings. He was looking at the coordinates on his screen, a single point of light on a map of a vast, empty desert. It was not empty. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was about to stand in a place that had been waiting for millennia to be found. The forgotten, the builders of this impossible device, had left a key in the door. The satellite had just shown him where to find it. His antagonist was no longer just the skeptical academic community. It was the vast, crushing weight of forgotten history itself. And the first step to defeating it was to step into the desert. The journey into the Atacama was an ordeal of physical and psychological endurance. Aris, more accustomed to the quiet confines of archives and libraries, found himself humbled by the raw, brutal majesty of the landscape. He secured the necessary permits through a combination of academic credentials and sheer, unrelenting persistence, hiring a local guide named Matteo, a silent, weathered man whose ancestors had navigated these deserts for centuries. For 3 days, they drove and then hiked, leaving the last vestiges of civilization behind until the world was reduced to rock, sand, and an immense, crystal-clear sky. The air was thin, and so dry it felt sharp in his lungs. The silence was absolute, a pressure on the eardrums. It was a landscape that felt profoundly alien, a perfect place to hide a secret from the stars. On the 4th day, Matteo pointed towards a distant, flat-topped mesa that rose abruptly from the desert floor. La Mesa de las Estrellas, Matteo said, his first unsolicited words of the trip. The table of the stars. The old stories say the sky spirits would dine there. Aris felt a jolt of recognition. The sky spirits, the catalyst for so many ancient myths. They reached the base of the mesa by late afternoon. The climb was treacherous, a narrow, winding path that seemed more like a goat trail than a human passage. As they ascended, Aris noticed something strange. The rock beneath his boots was not the typical reddish sandstone of the region. It was a dark, almost black basaltic rock, shot through with veins of a crystalline substance that seemed to faintly shimmer in the harsh sunlight. It felt dense, magnetic. When they finally pulled themselves onto the flat summit, Aris gasped, forgetting the burning in his lungs and the ache in his muscles. The entire surface of the mesa, a space easily the size of a football field, was not natural. It was a perfectly level platform, paved with the same black, crystalline stone. In the precise center of the platform was a shallow, circular depression, about 50 feet in diameter. And within this depression was the map. It was not carved or painted. The patterns were composed of inlaid strips of a pale, silvery metal that defied logic. The metal was cool to the touch despite the blistering sun, and it seemed to hum with a barely perceptible vibration. Aris fell to his knees, his hands hovering over the intricate design. It was a star chart, of that there was no doubt. He could recognize familiar constellations, but they were distorted, their relative positions altered. He pulled out his tablet, bringing up a standard celestial map. It didn't match. He tried adjusting for precession, running the star positions back thousands of years. Still no match. His frustration mounted. What was he missing? He stood up and walked the perimeter of the circle, his gaze fixed on the impossible artifact. Intuition over logic. He had to stop thinking like an astronomer on Earth. What if this wasn't a map of the stars, but a map from the stars? He pulled up his 3D galactic model software, a tool he'd designed himself. He input the positions of the stars on the mesa's map, locking them in place. Then he began to move the point of observation, pulling away from the solar system, out into the interstellar void. For an hour he worked, pivoting the virtual camera around the galaxy. Nothing. The pattern remained a jumble. Defeated, he was about to give up when his eyes fell upon the most prominent feature of the map, a swirling, intricate nebula depicted in the center, from which many of the star lines seemed to originate. On an impulse, he centered the virtual camera on the Orion Nebula and began pulling the viewpoint inward. The starfields on his screen began to shift, to warp. And then, with a sudden, breathtaking snap, they aligned. The star map on his tablet perfectly matched the metal inlay on the stone floor. It was a map of the local galactic neighborhood, as viewed from a point deep within the trapezium cluster of the Orion Nebula. Aris felt the world spin. This was not a map for humans on Earth. It was a map for travelers. A galactic roadmap with a "You Are Here" marker pointing to one of the most famous stellar nurseries in our sky. He pulled out the portable EMF meter he'd brought. As he moved it closer to the central depression, the needle jumped wildly, emitting a high-pitched whine. The signal was here. It was real. The black stone platform was a giant antenna, the metallic inlays a circuit board, and the entire mesa was a monument not to a god in the sky, but to a location in the sky. Mateo stood back, his face a mask of awe and fear. "The sky spirits," he whispered. They were not dining. They were showing the way home. Aris looked from the humming map at his feet to the vast, indifferent blue sky above. The mystery was deeper than he'd ever imagined. This wasn't just a marker. It was a piece of functioning technology that had been silently operating for untold eons. The forgotten were not primitive. They were engineers of the highest order. The revelation at the Atacama site was a seismic shock to Aris's understanding. It was one thing to theorize about celestial alignments. It was another to stand on a piece of functioning, extraterrestrial-oriented technology. He spent 2 more days on the mesa, meticulously documenting every detail with 3D scanners and high-resolution photography. The hum of the platform a constant companion. The journey back to civilization was a blur. The desert no longer felt empty. It felt charged with a profound and patient intelligence. Back in his office, surrounded by his familiar books and charts, the world felt different, smaller. The Atacama map was the key, the Rosetta Stone for his entire theory. If it existed, then there had to be others. His mind immediately went to the anchor of his life's work, Giza. For years, he had championed the Orion correlation theory, the idea that the 3 pyramids were a terrestrial map of Orion's belt. Mainstream Egyptology dismissed this as a coincidence, arguing the pyramids were tombs, nothing more. But now, Aris saw it with new eyes. The misleading narrative of the pyramids as merely grandiose sepulchres for pharaohs was a screen, a simplistic explanation for something far more complex. What if the pyramids, like the Atacama Mesa, were not just markers but functional devices? He pulled up satellite imagery of the Giza Plateau, overlaying it with geological surveys. The plateau was primarily limestone, a sedimentary rock. But the Great Pyramid was not just built on the limestone. Its foundations were deeply integrated with the natural rock, and it contained massive granite chambers. Granite, rich in quartz crystals. Quartz, known for its piezoelectric properties, the ability to generate an electric charge in response to applied mechanical stress. He began to run calculations, inputting the precise dimensions of the King's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, and the so-called air shafts that pointed with uncanny accuracy toward specific stars, including Alnitak in Orion's belt. In the accepted narrative, these were ventilation shafts or spiritual passages for the pharaoh's soul. But to Aris, they now looked like waveguides. The entire structure of the Great Pyramid, he theorized, was not a tomb, but an immense machine. A harmonic resonator designed to capture and amplify telluric energy, the natural vibrations of the Earth, and focus it into a coherent beam aimed at a specific point in the sky. The granite chambers would act as the power core, the limestone casing as an insulator, and the shafts as the targeting system. It was an idea so radical it bordered on madness, but it fit the evidence far more elegantly than the conventional explanation. Why build with such precision, using millions of tons of stone for a dead king? But to build a power plant, a communications device intended to last for eternity? For that, no effort would be too great. He cross-referenced his theory with the work of engineers who had studied the pyramid's acoustic properties. They had discovered that the King's Chamber resonated at a specific, extremely low frequency, a hum that was just below the threshold of human hearing. The entire structure was tuned like a giant musical instrument. He contacted Lena Petrova again, his voice electric with excitement. "Lena, I need you to do something for me. Reprocess the archival satellite data for the Giza Plateau. Don't look for a strong signal like the one in Atacama. Look for a harmonic overtone, a resonance signature in the microwave spectrum, synchronized with the Earth's fundamental Schumann resonance. Lena was skeptical, but the evidence from Atacama had earned him her cooperation. 2 days later, she called back, her voice strained with disbelief. "Aris, you're not going to believe this. There is a microwave energy spike over the Great Pyramid. It's incredibly faint, almost lost in the background noise. But it's there, and it pulses in a regular pattern that correlates with local seismic activity. The pyramid, it's ringing like a bell aimed at Orion." Aris leaned back in his chair, a profound sense of vindication washing over him. It wasn't just a map. It was a network. Atacama and Giza were 2 nodes in a planetary system of unimaginable age and sophistication. The ancient Egyptians and the unknown builders in the Andes were not separate cultures stumbling upon similar ideas. They were working from the same blueprint. They were heirs to the same legacy. The unveiling had begun. The accepted history of the ancient world was a carefully constructed facade, and he had just found the first 2 bricks that, when removed, would bring the entire wall crashing down. He looked at the star chart on his wall, at the constellation of Orion. The hunter. Was he hunting us, or were we, his children, hunting for a sign of his return? The mystery was no longer about a single site, but about the entire planet. And Aris suspected he had only just scratched the surface. With 2 confirmed nodes in his planetary network, a receiver in Atacama and a resonator in Giza, Aris's investigation accelerated from a determined crawl to a frantic sprint. The pattern was no longer a matter of intuition. It was a matter of data. If this network was global, as he suspected, there had to be more sites, more connections hidden within the folds of history and myth. His focus shifted to the Americas, to the dense jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula, home of the Maya. For centuries, scholars had marveled at the Mayan civilization's grasp of mathematics and astronomy. Their long count calendar was a masterwork of temporal mechanics, tracking time with a precision that was seemingly unnecessary for a Bronze Age society. The official explanation was, as always, rooted in agriculture and religion. But Aris saw something else. He saw system. The Mayan obsession was not with the sun or the moon, the typical drivers of ancient calendars, but with the Pleiades star cluster, the 7 sisters. Their entire cosmology, the rise and fall of their dynasties, was tethered to the heliacal rising of this distant star group. At the heart of their civilization stood the great city of Chichen Itza, dominated by the Pyramid of Kukulkan. Popularly known as a solar calendar in stone, Aris suspected its true purpose was far more profound. He analyzed the site's layout, its alignment not just to the sun on the equinoxes, but to the zenith passage of the Pleiades. He found a direct correlation. But the true anomaly lay buried in the Mayan codices, the few bark paper books that had survived the Spanish conquest. In the Dresden Codex, alongside complex astronomical tables, were depictions of their gods descending from the sky, often from a serpent or a sky band studded with stellar symbols. The misleading narrative interpreted these as poetic myths. Aris now saw them as technical diagrams. He hypothesized that Chichen Itza was another node, one tuned specifically to the Pleiades, a key hub in the celestial communication grid. A quick check of archival atmospheric data revealed a subtle, but distinct, gravimetric anomaly over the site, consistent with the energy signatures he now knew to look for. 3 nodes, 3 different star systems, Orion's belt, the Orion Nebula, the Pleiades. It wasn't a single message. It was a network with multiple points of interest. As he mapped the sites, a new, more daring thought began to form. What if the network wasn't just for receiving information? What if it was also a transportation system? Not for physical bodies, but for consciousness, for information, for life itself. This led him to his next, and perhaps most controversial, data point. The Dogon people of Mali, Africa. The Dogon possessed an impossible knowledge. In the 1930s, French anthropologists were stunned to learn that the Dogon's sacred traditions, passed down orally for centuries, described the star Sirius in intricate detail. They knew that Sirius was a binary system, with a main star, Sirius A, and a tiny, incredibly dense companion star, Sirius B. They knew Sirius B was invisible to the naked eye, that it was immensely heavy, and that it had an elliptical orbit of 50 years. This was knowledge modern astronomy had only confirmed with powerful telescopes in the 20th century. The standard explanation was that the Dogon had been contaminated by a Western visitor sometime in the early 1900s, who had told them these facts. This theory was thin and patronizing, implying the Dogon had simply absorbed this complex astronomical data and woven it into the heart of their most sacred, ancient religion overnight. Aris rejected it utterly. The Dogon's own story was far more direct. They claimed this knowledge was given to them by the Namo, amphibious beings, who came from the Sirius system in a great ship that spun and landed with tremendous noise. They taught the Dogon the secrets of the heavens. Aris realized the Dogon homeland was the missing piece of the puzzle, the node for the Sirius system. He could find no grand pyramid, no stone observatory. But what if the node wasn't a structure? What if it was biological? What if a divine message was encoded directly into the oral traditions, the very DNA of a people chosen as living archives? The idea was staggering. A network of stone and energy in Egypt and the Americas, and a network of flesh and blood in Africa. The architects of this system had used every tool at their disposal, building monuments to last eons and entrusting their knowledge to human lineage itself. He now had 4 confirmed points in his global matrix, each tied to a specific stellar location, each dismissed by mainstream science with a convenient but deeply flawed explanation. The weight of the conspiracy was no longer just academic, it was historical. The truth had not been merely lost, it had been actively suppressed, replaced by simpler stories that kept humanity in a state of comfortable ignorance. The picture was becoming terrifyingly clear. Someone or something had laid out a welcome mat across the entire planet, pointing to different parts of our galactic neighborhood. The question was no longer if. The question was why. And Aris had a chilling premonition that the answer was hidden in the signal itself, the rhythmic, prime-numbered heartbeat that had started it all. The investigation had reached a critical turning point. Aris had identified a series of globally distributed nodes, each corresponding to a specific star system and each exhibiting a subtle, anomalous energy signature. The Giza resonator, the Atacama receiver, the Pleiadian focus geometry of Chichen Itza, and the living library of the Dogon people. These were not isolated mysteries. They were components of a single planetary-scale machine. But what was its purpose? The answer, he knew, lay in the signal from the Atacama, the prime number heartbeat that had initiated his quest. It was the only active broadcasting element he had found so far. He reached out to Lena Petrova again, no longer as a fringe theorist seeking validation, but as a collaborator in a discovery that dwarfed them both. "Lena, we've been looking at the sites in isolation," he began, pacing his office as he spoke, the energy of his thoughts almost palpable. "We've confirmed the local energy signatures. But what if the sites are linked? What if they are synchronized?" He proposed a new, audacious hypothesis. The faint signals they had detected were not the primary event. They were echoes, harmonic resonances. The real signal was the one being transmitted between the sites, a silent conversation happening just beyond the range of their standard sensors. He asked her to task a network of coordinated satellites, aiming them at the identified nodes simultaneously. The goal was to capture not just the energy at each site, but the phase relationship between them. It was a massive request, requiring significant resources and a level of trust that went far beyond her job description. But Lena, her scientific curiosity now fully ignited, agreed to try. For a week, there was silence. Aris was suspended in a state of agonizing anticipation. He reviewed his notes, refined his theories, and stared at the global map on his wall, the red pins marking the nodes like wounds on the skin of the Earth. He felt he was on the precipice of a revelation that would redefine the human experience, a truth so profound it might be too much for the world to bear. Then, the call came. It was late at night. Lena's voice was hushed, filled with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "Aris," she whispered, "you were right. Oh God, you were so right." The data was astounding. The energy signatures at Giza, Atacama, and Chichen Itza were not just pulsing. They were pulsing in perfect, instantaneous synchrony. There was no propagation delay, no time for a signal to travel between them, even at the speed of light. It was as if they were all connected by a subspace network, a phenomenon that modern physics would label impossible. It was quantum entanglement on a planetary scale. "That's not all," Lena continued, her voice trembling slightly. "The signal isn't originating from any of the sites. They are all receiving. Or, more accurately, they are resonating with a signal from a single external source. We triangulated the source vector based on the phase variations, minuscule as they are." Aris held his breath. "Where?" "It's coming from deep space," she said. "The origin point is precise. It's not just the Orion constellation. It's a specific point within the Orion Nebula, right in the heart of the trapezium cluster. The same location indicated on the Atacama star map." The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in Aris's mind with the force of a physical blow. The ancient sites were not beacons. They were not tombs or calendars in their primary function. They were receivers. The entire planet had been engineered into a colossal radio telescope, with multiple dishes tuned and phased together to receive a single, faint broadcast that had been streaming across the interstellar void for millennia. A message. A divine message, not from a deity in a mythological heaven, but from an intelligence in a physical, astronomical location. The signal itself, the synchronized pulse, was the carrier wave. The prime number heartbeat was the handshake, the signal that announced its artificial nature. But what was it carrying? There had to be information modulated onto the wave, a message encoded within the rhythmic pulses. "Lena, we need to analyze the fine structure of the signal," Aris urged, his mind on fire. "The variations in amplitude, frequency, and phase between the major pulses. That's where the message is. It's not in the beat, it's in the spaces between the beats." This was the true anomaly, the one that deepened the mystery to an almost unbearable degree. An ancient, impossibly advanced civilization had not just visited Earth. It had re-engineered the planet's surface, turning it into a communications device of breathtaking scale and complexity, and had left it running for thousands of years, patiently waiting for its inhabitants to develop the technology and the wisdom to finally listen. The forgotten were not just engineers, they were broadcasters. And humanity, for its entire history, had been living inside a radio, completely oblivious to the music that was playing. The realization that Earth was a planetary-scale receiver for a message from Orion was the final, electrifying paradigm shift for Aris. The slow burn of his investigation had hit an accelerant. The race was now on to decode the message itself. This was no longer a task for an archaeoastronomer alone. He and Lena assembled a small, clandestine team of trusted experts. A cryptographer who owed Lena a significant favor, a quantum physicist whose theories were as fringe as Aris's own, and a brilliant young linguist who specialized in proto-human language structures. They worked in secret, using a secure air-gapped server in a basement at the university. The data from Lena's satellites a torrent of impossibly complex information. For weeks, they made little progress. The signal was a labyrinth of nested mathematical patterns. The cryptographer, a man accustomed to breaking human-made codes, was stumped. "It's too perfect, too clean," he'd said in frustration. "Human encryption is messy, full of shortcuts and compromises. This is like trying to find a secret message in the value of pi. It's all message." The breakthrough, when it came, was not from cryptography, but from Aris's own domain, intuition. He was staring at a visualization of the signal's waveform, a chaotic-looking series of spikes and troughs, when he noticed a recurring shape, a subtle geometric ratio that seemed to underpin the entire structure. It was the golden ratio, phi, a mathematical constant that appears throughout nature, from the spiral of a seashell to the structure of a galaxy. On a hunch, he asked the team to filter the signal, using the golden ratio as a decryption key, treating it as the fundamental constant of the message's language. The moment they applied the filter, the chaos collapsed. The screen resolved into a breathtakingly elegant and ordered stream of data. It was like tuning a radio to the correct frequency and hearing clear music emerge from a wall of static. The physicist was the first to understand what they were seeing. This is a primer," he whispered, his face pale. "It's a step-by-step guide to the fundamental laws of the universe." The message began with the basics: the value of pi, the structure of a hydrogen atom, the resonant frequencies of common elements. It was a universal Hello World program, establishing a common language of physics and mathematics. But then it became more complex. It laid out the complete structure of the DNA double helix, showing not just its form, but the specific quantum principles that allowed it to self-replicate. It was a blueprint for life itself. The linguist, watching the patterns unfold, pointed out that the data was structured like an epic poem, with recurring themes and motifs, as if it were designed to be memorable, to be passed down through oral tradition as much as read by a machine. This explained the Dogon. They hadn't just been told about Sirius B, they had been given a stanza of this cosmic poem, one they had preserved perfectly for generations. The most staggering part of the message came next. It was a series of complex diagrams that seemed to describe the fabric of spacetime itself. The physicist identified it as a visual representation of warp metric engineering, a theoretical model for faster-than-light travel. It wasn't a practical schematic a human could build, but it was the fundamental theory, the core principles laid bare. It was as if a caveman had been given a copy of Einstein's field equations. The message was a gift, an inheritance, a divine message, not of worship or commandments, but of knowledge. It was a technological and biological starter kit for a young civilization, left by a far older and more advanced one. It was the ultimate unveiling, peeling back the mystery of our own existence and the universe around us. Then came the final section of the repeating broadcast. It was a map, not a 2D map like the one in Atacama, but a dynamic, 3D rotating model of the local galactic cluster. It showed the trajectory of our solar system through the galaxy, and it showed the origin point of the broadcast, a single stable terrestrial planet orbiting a G-type main sequence star deep within the Orion Nebula. And overlaid on the map was a simple, elegant equation that described the relationship between the two systems. It was an invitation. Aris sat back, his body trembling with the enormity of the discovery. This was the confession, the truth in all its chilling and magnificent frankness, laid bare in the universal language of science. Our gods, the sky spirits, the Namo, were not supernatural beings. They were scientists. They were engineers. They were our galactic neighbors. Or perhaps something more. The DNA blueprint, the fundamental constants of our universe. Was it a gift or was it a signature? Was this a message to a species they had discovered or a message to a species they had created? The line between divine guidance and genetic engineering blurred into non-existence. Humanity was not an accident of evolution on a lonely planet. It was a project, a seed planted and nurtured with a stream of data from the stars, designed to one day grow up and understand the message its creators had left behind. The decoded message lay before them, a testament of cosmic proportions stored on a humming server in a university basement. It was a truth so vast and paradigm-shattering that Aris felt an almost physical pressure in the room, the weight of a new reality settling upon the world. The time for secrecy was over. The world had to know. He knew that presenting this discovery through conventional academic channels would be impossible. It would be buried in committees, dismissed as a hoax, and he would be professionally crucified. He needed a different stage, a direct confrontation with the established order. The antagonist, the hidden in plain sight culprit, was not a person, but an entire system of thought, the comfortable, deeply entrenched dogma of conventional history and science that insisted on humanity's solitary and unguided ascent. He arranged for a special presentation at the Global Symposium for Interdisciplinary Science, a major conference attended by the world's leading minds in physics, history, and anthropology. It was the Lion's Den. Lena, flying in from Geneva, stood with him, her presence a silent endorsement from the world of hard data. His former critics and tenured detractors were all in the audience, their faces a mixture of curiosity and condescension. The lights dimmed. Aris took the stage, not with the timid air of a fringe theorist, but with the solemn gravity of a man delivering a eulogy for an old world. He began not with his conclusions, but with the hook, the mystery that had captivated humanity for ages. For millennia, he began, his voice steady and clear, echoing through the large auditorium. We have believed that our ancient wonders, the pyramids, the great calendars, the impossible astronomical knowledge of our ancestors, were monuments to our own burgeoning genius. We have told ourselves a story of isolation, of a lonely spark of consciousness igniting on a single planet in a vast, silent cosmos. Today, I am here to tell you that this story, while comforting, is a lie. A murmur went through the crowd. He then began the unveiling, methodically, piece by piece. He presented the satellite data from the Atacama, the impossible star map. Oriented from Orion. He showed the energy signatures from Giza, the undeniable proof of the Great Pyramid as a functioning resonator. He laid out the global network, connecting Chichen Itza, the Dogon and other sites, showing their synchronous, faster-than-light connection. With each slide, each piece of evidence, the atmosphere in the room shifted from skepticism to uneasy silence, and then to stunned disbelief. Lena took the podium to explain the triangulation of the signal source, her calm, factual delivery leaving no room for doubt. The signal was real. The source was the Orion Nebula. Finally, Aris presented the message itself. The blueprint for DNA, the primer on physics, the map of the stars. He didn't ask them to believe in aliens or flying saucers. He asked them to look at the data, at the mathematics, at the sheer, undeniable elegance of the decoded information. We have called them gods, Aris declared, his voice rising with passion. The Egyptians called them Ra, the Maya knew Kukulkan, the Dogon spoke of the Namo. We have mythologized our own creators. The divine messages we have sought in holy books and prayers have been broadcasting in the microwave spectrum for 100,000 years, waiting for us to build the right kind of radio. Our religions, our myths, our deepest spiritual urges are a racial memory, a distorted echo of our true origin. We are not from this earth alone. We are a colony, a seed, the children of Orion. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The accepted narrative of history is now obsolete. The pyramids were not tombs. The Mayan calendar was not just for farming. They were components in a galactic communication system. The forgotten truth is this: our history is not our own. We have been guided, taught, and perhaps even designed by an intelligence so far beyond our own that we have mistaken their science for divinity. He looked out at the sea of faces, shocked, angry, awestruck. He had not just presented a theory. He had challenged the very foundation of human identity. The climax of his investigation was not a single, explosive confrontation with one person, but a quiet, devastating presentation of facts that held a mirror up to the entire human race. In that moment, the true antagonist, the comforting lie of our own special solitude, was exposed, and the room was filled with the terrifying, exhilarating light of a much larger, more complex truth. The silence that followed his final word was the most profound sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of a world changing. The aftermath of Aris Thorne's presentation was a storm of unprecedented scale. The initial reaction from the academic and scientific communities was a predictable wall of denial and outrage. He was denounced as a charlatan, a sensationalist, a madman. His data was impounded, his methods questioned, his sanity debated on news networks across the globe. The misleading narrative, the established dogma of human history, fought back with the ferocity of a cornered animal. Yet, the truth, once revealed, could not be entirely suppressed. Lena Petrova's data was independently verified by other space agencies, who, under immense public pressure, confirmed the existence of the synchronized energy grid and the extraterrestrial signal. Laboratories began to re-examine the DNA code through the lens of the Orion primer, finding new layers of mathematical elegance and informational density that had previously gone unnoticed. The world fractured. There were those who embraced the new reality with religious fervor, forming new belief systems centered around the star fathers of Orion. Others fell into existential despair, unable to cope with the idea that humanity was not the master of its own destiny, but a mere experiment. The majority, however, lived in a state of profound and unsettling cognitive dissonance, caught between the history they had always known and the undeniable evidence of a past far grander and more mysterious than they had ever been taught. For Aris, the personal cost was immense. He was ostracized by his university, his name becoming synonymous with controversy. Yet he felt a deep, unshakable peace. He had pursued the truth, no matter the cost, and delivered it to the world. He had given a voice to the forgotten, the ancient builders who had worked to preserve a message across the gulf of time. His work was done. The resolution of the great historical mystery was not an ending, but a new beginning for humanity. The question was no longer are we alone, but who are we now? In the months that followed the revelation, Aris retreated from the public eye, finding solace not in debate or defense, but in the quiet contemplation of the stars. One clear, cold night, he stood on a hill overlooking the sleeping city, the glow of human civilization, a faint orange stain against the horizon. Above, the sky was a tapestry of infinite possibility. He looked towards the constellation of Orion, the hunter, hanging like a celestial hourglass in the winter sky. He no longer saw a mythological figure or a random collection of distant suns. He saw a signpost. He saw home. The divine messages, hidden for so long, were now being heard. The whispers from the stars had become a global conversation. The long silence of the universe had been broken, not by an invasion or a cataclysm, but by the patient, persistent broadcasting of knowledge and an invitation. Humanity had, in a sense, grown up. We had finally learned to listen. The hope, Aris thought, was that we would now learn what to say in response. The mystery of our past was solved, but the mystery of our future had just begun. He felt a profound connection to every human who had ever lived and gazed at that same patch of sky with wonder. The Egyptian priest, the Mayan astronomer, the Dogon elder, the modern scientist. They were all part of the same story, a story of a lost child looking up, searching for the faces of its parents in the infinite darkness. The somber weight of the revelation was balanced by this new, hopeful purpose. The search for meaning was no longer a lonely, terrestrial endeavor. It was a cosmic one. The final shot of the narrative is not of a dusty ruin or a computer screen, but of Aris Thorne's face, turned toward the heavens, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek, a tear not of sorrow, but of awe, of recognition, and of a deep, soul-shattering sense of belonging. The great, silent dialogue between Earth and Orion had finally, after 100 millennia, become a two-way conversation.